Okay, my name is Matthew Gata, and this is a presentation on chapters 1 through 5, Our Land Was a Forest, by Kayano Shigeru. I'm going to separate this by chapter, the first one being Our Nibutani Valley, which is chapter 1. Chapter 1 starts out with the author explaining what he was like as a young child, growing up in a small, impoverished home with only his grandmother, his two older brothers, an older sister, two younger brothers, and his parents to raise him. The house was made of wood with a roof of thatched reed layers. The children didn't have anything to do inside the house because of its size, but for the most part, they spent their time outside, playing in the cold, running around until they really missed home, and then they would go home, and the author, Kayano, would go find his mom and warm up when he was really cold. And most of the first chapter details his memories of his grandmother, more specifically, and about him growing up. He also mentions fireplace with a shelf, and when he was growing and getting taller, because they had normal seating places, what would happen is he'd stand up and hit his head, because it was just tall enough. He was just tall enough just to touch it, and he'd always bash his head against it. And his parents would laugh and jokingly say that he'd need to blow on the shelf to kind of, make it feel better. And his naivety is shown because he believes basically everything that his mother or grandmother or father tells him. Repeatedly in the sections of chapter 1, his grandmother would tell him stories, because she basically favored him as her favorite grandchild. And the stories that she would tell him would relate to the Ainu gods. And the Ainu gods were basically like humans that, walked like us, spoke like us, looked like us, and worked just like us, did the same things we did, but in the land of the gods. And they dwelled in each and every element of the earth. His grandmother's name, by the way, was Husi, and she died at the age of 95. And thanks to her, Kayano learned a lot about the Ainu and their traditions, and how to speak Ainu. And his most memorable memory of Husi was when they were at the creek. They were walking, and Husi tells his grandchild, to wait. And basically, they wash at the creek, and she says, when I'm long gone, I want you to remember me every time you come by this creek, and that we washed here together as family. The author then explains the Nibutani Valley and how the Ainu found it. And the Nibutani Valley was filled with fresh salmon, large trees, plenty of different types of food, and the Ainu people believed that the god Oki-Kur-Mikami was born on the land near the region of the Saru River. And because of that, the land was blessed. And they believed that this god was also the very being that taught their people their folk wisdom. And he makes a remark saying that this land was then eventually ruined by the Shamu people. And the Shamo, or Shamu, I call it Shamo. It's probably pronounced Shamo. The Shamu people are translated in Japanese to English as the Midland people. And that pretty much covers chapter 1. On to chapter 2, the 4 seasons in the Ainu community. Chapter 2 discusses the activities of the Ainu people, more specifically the children and what they did during the 4 seasons. An example of this would be in the spring, the children would make snow candy by cutting wedges into what they call topeni, which is basically a sugar maple tree. And by collecting the dew into a cylinder and eating it once it freezes over, they would have basically iced candy or snow candy. They also, found squashed potatoes from the potato fields long after they had been left from the winter. And they ate that a lot. And pretty much a lot of what the Ainu children did for fun consisted of foraging tasty plants to eat and catching fish as well, to make stews and to eat them as well. And during the mid-1920s, the children's games were actually changed. They evolved a bit to be similar to what the Shamo people did. And examples of that were that they would play with the jump rope or the bouncy ball, or even use objects like hoops of bamboo tied to barrels. They'd use wooden stilts, and they'd even use the hobby of stone skipping. The Shamo people did it, and so did the Ainu people. They skipped stones against waters and roads and stuff just to see how far they'd get it. And it was very popular. And during the summer, in the Saru River, there was a lot of fishing done. And they'd do canoeing. And, during this episode when he was explaining canoeing, he said that the older children, at just the right length and depth, they teach them how to swim by kind of throwing them overboard and saying, learn the hard way. But that's the summer. And in the autumn, there was a lot of salmon fishing done, more so than any other season. And the author, Kayano, describes his father, Kazawa Seitaro, as a very fond and proud salmon fisher man. And he didn't know if he was either proud as a fisherman or just he did it because their family was poor and didn't have anything to eat. But I'd like to say that he ventured towards the initial decision. And basically all the villagers would fish during the autumn season. And a little bit after the autumn, around mid-November, the Ainu would then gather reeds to thatch their roofs and prepare their houses for the winter again while getting the food for the season. And that pretty much describes 90% of Chapter 2. I'm going to go ahead and move along to Chapter 3. Chapter 3 is entitled, My Grandfather, a Slave to the Shamo People. And this chapter was very interesting. The author Kayano reveals his surname, as you know, Kayano, but he explains it in depth that he was got this surname because he was adopted by the Kayano family, but somehow he was raised by his own family, his real parents, but he still kept the name. And Kayano explains that the heritage of the Ainu people, about 5 generations back, started with a man named Owan Kur, and their ancestor basically was one of 3 brothers that set sail from Shizune to start separate homes, separate tribes pretty much. And he was the youngest brother. And they had little insignias on their arrowheads to represent who they wore. So that way, even though they were separate in separate homes, because they were family, they would still help each other out no matter what once they saw the insignia, and their people would do that too. And